during these days, we use a very strict protocol for our research. We documented all the improvisation of the improvisers. We recorded their hands movement and their body movement to try to understand how they reacted to something that was not known before. We put them in front of keyboards that they never played, and they had to adapt. We asked them to play on a given subject or according a precise form. All these materials will be then used in several ways. Scientific papers, didactic videos, and a storytelling where we will try to explain the process of musicking, which is just making good sounds for good people in a moment.
Guardare anche la tastiera, vedi? Sì. Che copia che faccio io. Perfetto.
The idea of this National Interest Research Project is to explore different ways in which improvisation and composition intertwines in the history of music of Europe from the late Renaissance to the present days. I got convinced that we might have an angle here to explore what happens when an individual living in the 21st century, trained as a musician with different background, interested in historical instruments, meet for the first time instruments I have not met yet, and try to make music on it. The hope is that we can find a way to discuss with different perspectives about what makes music interesting and how improvisatory practices can help us to build up on something that we know and create something new.
Improvisation is something that I embodied quite early on in my life, basically because I always wanted to create music. I remember going to church services and wanting to imitate the sound of the organ at home with a little keyboard I had. And basically, I learned the songs by heart that I could hear there or in concerts or something. And I would try to reproduce them, so there was no way in which I could read when I was like 4 or 5 years old any score, because it looked like hieroglyphics to me, and the only option possible I could use for trying to reproduce or get closer to producing sounds as similar as possible to those pieces was to improvise. Improvisation is the way in which I naturally communicate through music.
Okay, so since we want to start with the instrument, there is nothing better than having a little presentation by Walter, who rediscovered the embodied tradition of building an organ, starting from something that he took from the past and he make possible for us to feel and look.
So thank you, Massimiliano, for the kind invitation. My talk is focused on Renaissance styles organ with open wooden pipes, like the Monteverdi organ you see in front of you there. So this type of organ was made up of cypress pipes and it was popular in Italy during the 16th and 17th century, both in sacred and secular contexts. So, borrowing words from Emilio de Cavalieri, I say that cypress pipes make an organ suave, sweet, of excellent quality, perfect subtle and suave, and even touchstone for great voices. I hope my Monteverdi will be so good enough.
When I encounter a historic organ, for me it's always two things coming together. First, I of course read up about it when I've never been there, and then you have a certain expectation, and the more experience you have, the more expectations you actually have from an organ. And then the fun part starts. You just start exploring all the different stops, the touch, and then you have the wonderful sensation when your expectation is coming through actually, and sometimes you have kind of a disappointment. It's a very diverse thing actually, and for me it's not only the sound but also the touch, how the church looks like, even the smell of the church, everything comes into play when you encounter a historic instrument, and that's what I love about it. It's really a very complete experience, but in the end, of course, it's about sound.
During these days, we work with improvisers, giving them no paper at all, but just asking them to work on specific tasks, on different organs, listening to each other, sometimes not, sometimes yes. And we try to experiment with the devices that we have in the 21st century, so with the recordings and with the experimental settings of cognitive scholars helping us to understand how the mind works. We ask them to be free and spontaneous. We interviewed them after, but also before, and we discussed together as a group what is music, what we discovered. We work with musicologists, organologists, cognitive scientists, and musicians on a common task: try to reconstruct the way in which our forebears experienced music, made music on the spot. There is nothing magic. You need some talent, you need some creativity, you need a lot of training, and you need a very special component: the encounter of living bodies and minds with instruments. Thank you, grazie. Now, what we are going to do is to listen again, all together, to the whole short presentation.
Good sound on a musical instrument, to me, is that which explores the full potential of what the instrument can do within parameters of an aesthetic concept, because what is the potential? So the first aspect in realizing for me what is a good sound is spending time with an instrument. In the case of the harpsichords, I think modern practice explores mostly certain aspects of the instruments and mostly of the music that can be played on the instrument, and little on what the instrument can give as a source for the music. Work with the instrument means exploring construction principles that are repeated and that create certain patterns of how the body interacts with it, and therefore what are the possibilities of the sound.
Okay, I think we don't have time. There are some recording missing, but for sake of time, I will skip to the group part. So we start with the performance. And what were your initial impressions of the instruments after you put your hands on the keyboard? What did you realize? Claudio?
So with both instruments, I had to cope with the difficulty of not knowing at all the instrument. So I started exploring the keyboards with some stable chord. The first 5 seconds were the most difficult for me because, I didn't know the keyboard, the stop, and especially with the smaller one, that is a wonderful instrument, but in my experience it was the most difficult instrument to play because you were also inflating the air, so it was quite a big task, but interesting. La mia relazione con gli strumenti storici non è di lunga data e neanche felicissima, nel senso che la musica e gli strumenti che più prediligo sono, diciamo così, più recenti, più vicini ai giorni nostri, sebbene capisco quale sia l'importanza non solo di conoscere la musica scritta in un periodo, ma anche di suonarla sugli strumenti che si avvicinano il più possibile alle caratteristiche costruttive e timbriche di un determinato periodo, perché lo strumento sembra che a un certo momento ti dica che cosa è meglio fare e che cosa è meglio evitare. Quindi io ritengo che questa sia un'operazione fondamentale se si vuole ampliare il proprio orizzonte musicale.
Beyond the usual, work with the affordances for experimenting new sounds. We want to explore how a specific instrument reacts to a way of playing different from the one deriving from the musical style and harmonic language historical more appropriate to it. what were your feelings or your ideas? Because you clearly tried to do something different in the
Of
moment.
course, that I deliberately wanted to go last, because then I already know the sound, I have heard some ideas, and then, and it's typical how my brain works, I want to do something else. So I was, during the others, already thinking, okay, I can start with an upbeat, for example. I can do a different rhythm, I can do the inversion of the theme, stuff like that. Then, of course, you fall into the pit that you start overthinking. But that's actually what I tried to do. Like, the start was very much thought through, of course, a lot of thematic material. And then after a while, I just let it go and let's see what happens. And then whenever I had a new idea, I thought, okay, let's first make it very strict and then let go again. That was my approach this time. And then the combination of just listening to the wonderful sound, the feeling of the organ, and at the same time always this very clear approach from the brain, like what am I doing, where is the theme, how can I...
I mean, also your fingering movement, your procedural things were creating some art, and not just the filling up, it was just some building material on which you elaborated in a very smart way, but thanks to your easiness at the keyboard. Historical improvisation is not only playing with the music of the past, with the rules and with the ideas of people who are dead by a long time. It's also mixing this vocabulary with the experience, with your experience. All of our improvisers have different backgrounds. They will tell you stories, they will tell you what is a good sound for them. They will tell you how they live improvisation. It's a world we can explore in so many different ways. Improvisation makes you free, and improvisation makes the music of the past what it used to be, just music. So I think it has been a very productive afternoon, and we heard a lot of good music. But what we could do is a little final discussion about one of the main targets that we have in this project, and is how we introduce young generation to this approach to creativity in a field, the antique music and early music and early stuff that is considered to be, by definition, dead. Maybe we can also have a sort of circle of identity here and don't feel alone.
Yes, for me, starting to improvise was quite an original way, because I remember that I started to improvise before learning music. At home we had the collection of books, my first Bach, my first Mozart, my first Beethoven, and I remember that when I was 4 years old, I put on the stand of the piano just the cover, the book enclosed.
Very recognizable.
Yes, very good. But and I remember that I was I don't remember what I was playing, but I was just improvising, thinking to be. Mozart, thinking to be, but I don't know, I didn't know anything. So, and after also I experimented some improvisation, but always without know that it was improvisation. You know that in Italy, unfortunately, most of the church has this book with the words, the lyrics of the songs, but without any notes. Without, if you're lucky, there are the chords for the guitars. And in my case, in the village where I was playing, I was 6 or 7 years old. The service was this book. And I was just improvising on this chord series for the choir. And after I apply the technique that is fundamental for learning improvisation, that is transposition. I think that learning improvisation is just something that has to do with is a such of memory. But it's not a memory, a positional memory, but it's a rational memory.
Exactly.
You have to understand the part of the speech, and you have to learn to be able to transport everywhere.
Again, it's like a language. I mean,
Like
if you want to be intriguing as a speaker, making a nice narrative, making a good story, you need to master your language. That's step one. But if it's not passionate, if you just blur out some words in the right order, no one is intrigued. So, and indeed, I totally agree. Transposing of music is really important because that shows you, do I really know what I'm doing? So if I can play some nice chords in F major and I can do it in G major and in A flat major as well, then you know. Then you know that you really master it. Then you can go to the point that you embody it, that you really don't care what key it is, you can just use it.
My relationship with historical keyboards is something that started thanks for the improvisation. Because when I started to go into the world of the historical informing performance, I understood that I had to know much better all the early keyboards in order to understand the repertoire, in order to understand the way to create the sound. A good sound for me is something very difficult to express, but I can say that for me sound is not just something that has to do with the timbre of the instrument, but is something that has to do more with the harmony and with the form of the piece. So I think that try to improvise, to use the instrument following a certain approach to the style and a certain approach to the improvisation can create something that is the good sounds for the audience and also for the player.
am speaking now in front of the Antegnati organ in Mantua, Basilica di Santa Barbara. On this balcony, Monteverdi and other musicians were making history. Now we are here making experiments and trying to reconstruct what they might have felt. Subjectivity in music cannot be eliminated. We cannot do a scientific reenactment of something that was in the past. We can just experiment and see how we deal with the same materials.
Kind of weird because I come from Spain and we do have a lot of historical instruments there, and even I would say very similar to the Italian ones. But the instruments there are very much inaccessible or largely inaccessible. So it was not until I went to Groningen, to the Netherlands, to study piano and organ in 2018 that I really started getting in contact with historical keyboards, with historical instruments, and learning how to adapt to them, because that was the status question, so to say. There's many different instruments, many good instruments, many wonderful organs in the province. I think we all agree on that, but each one has a different touch, so you really need to learn to adapt to the instrument. So I think I could say that
what did I gain from this experience? Well, I think as a researcher, I got some confirmation of the importance of being with an historical instrument, of encountering a keyboard in order to generate a music idea. Work with wonderful musicians is always important for understanding that the way in which they feel, the way in which they tell you how they feel, is an important element in the story. Music can be absolute, can be theoretical, but it's also done by ordinary people and by their involvement. It's something that for pop musicians or for somebody making music in the street is very ordinary. We have to bring back this idea of people who are having fun by playing. We have to bring back imperfection. We have to bring back different emotions and fight against the stereotypes of ancient or early music and something boring or predetermined, when you have just to present on a stage and do something always in the same time. Music is fun, this process is fun, and musicking on historical keyboard is a lot of fun.